This podcast is for anyone who has ever felt stuck, whether it's a major life transition, a dark night of the soul, or just staying small out of fear. If you've ever struggled to move forward, if you're repeating unhealthy patterns in relationships, or you have a black belt in beating yourself up, you were meant for more, and this podcast is for you. We'll get real, we'll get vulnerable, we'll probably cuss a little bit, and we'll get to the root of it all, your self-worth. With every step, you'll find the courage to rise. Welcome to this week's episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. This week, we're going to dive in on your internal power of choice. And this is the thing that truly, when you understand the depth and the breadth of this is where your true internal freedom lies. What that means is that no matter what is happening outside of you, the entire world can be going to hell in a handbasket. Not that it totally is or anything. But the entire world can be going to hell around you. Your personal life could be falling apart. There could be all manner of things that you're experiencing. And it doesn't mean that you're not impacted by it in some way, but what it means is ultimately you are the one that has the power to control and to regulate how you're actually choosing to respond to those things within yourself, because that is ultimately the power of choice that you have within your own world. And I want to start this episode with a story. So the things that I talk about, the things that I teach, these were not lightly learned lessons. These were things that I learned and discovered literally by living it, by falling on my face over and over again, by all the things. And so that's why I have come to have the experiences that I have. It's nothing to do with being better or worse than anybody else. And it's everything to do with having repeated experience with these things. And it actually, when I got into human design, and I've mentioned that on the last couple episodes, but when I got into human design and I realized that my life path was a 3-5, it just explained everything, because essentially, in a nutshell, what it boils down to is that you're meant to go do all the things, make all the mistakes, and then teach all the lessons. Massive oversimplification, but it resonated with me. But the story that I want to start with is there are certain practices. You all have probably heard me talk, if you've been in my world for a minute, you've heard me talk about this idea of having of understanding what are your own personal rituals, your uncompromisables, those things that keep you in alignment, and those go-to things that you can rely on within yourself. There's certain practices, and it doesn't necessarily have to be always the same ones. Everybody's different. But what it is sort of your own personal recipe for how you maintain your inner world, how you maintain your well-being and your peace. And for me, a huge part of that has become my meditation practice. And I meditate every single day. And the reason that I give you that data point is that there are reasons that I meditate every day, because these things that, that I teach, you've heard me say, it's just like lifting weights. If you don't go to the gym and lift a weight and all of a sudden you're in shape. It's doing the things consistently until you break over a certain plateau. And then with consistency, it becomes more of a maintenance practice. If you're not looking to grow more, I'm going to get way in the weeds on the weight training analogy, but if you're just looking to get a baseline of fitness, it takes less to maintain it than it does to actually create it in the first place, which is to say that these are maintenance practices. So the meditation practice, for example, or the gratitude practice, they're maintenance practices to help you continue to cultivate your own inner world. And so my meditation practice is mine, and I'm always learning and growing and deepening it and all the things. And so it's a very important part of who I am and what I do. And it's a very important part of how I keep my shit together. I don't know what. But around the time of the end of October and early in November, I broke several of my own rules, which is I got lost in the scroll holes online. And you know the scroll hole, it's when you call it doom scrolling, it's the scroll hole. And got sucked into news outlets. I did all the things that I purposely choose not to do on a regular basis because of all the reasons that I've listed and enumerated in previous episodes about what it's actually doing to your nervous system. And I broke those rules. I started doing that and I stopped meditating. And it wasn't a conscious choice. It was just, I stopped meditating for about 2 weeks. Never again. Sometimes you just have to prove to yourself why you do these practices. But I'm telling you this for a reason. So I got, over the course of those 2 weeks, with some things that were going on in the external world, I got pulled really deeply into a dark place of fear, of, all the things. And I was experiencing a lot of, just the very worst case scenario, but it really was flashes of how bad things could get in the world. And that's not to scare anyone or anything. It's just that I think many times people underestimate, especially in the US, where, prior to this year, certainly we've had our problems, but it's not like certain countries in which women have absolutely no rights whatsoever, or many other countries that I can point to. And I say that because I think sometimes we live in this blissful ignorance that these things can't happen. And I just got into a dark place with it. And during this time, I was getting this little soul nudge, this little intuitive hit. And this is what I mean when I say these intuitive hits are coming to you for a reason. And I love to read. I love books. But usually what I'm reading, well, my to be read pile is just endless. But usually what I'm reading is I'm reading about neuroscience. I'm reading about the biology of change. I'm reading about quantum physics. I'm reading about spirituality. I'm reading all of these books, and every now and then I'll do a fiction book. I got into Ursula Le Guin last year, and throw something in there. It's basically just whatever interests me, whatever's top of mind. And I kept getting this nudge that I needed to read Nelson Mandela's autobiography. And I can't tell you the last time I read an autobiography or a biography. It was probably in school. And I kept getting this nudge. And I was like, fine, because I know to listen to these now. So I picked up this book, and it's 620 pages long. And I'm equally as notorious for reading 6 books at once and making them about quarter through before I pick up a new one. But I said, fine, I bought the book and I started reading it. I started reading it about the time I had also gotten the intuitive nudge that I should go to this meditation retreat in November. And it was kind of weird timing. And when I felt the urge to go, I was like, I don't know if this really makes sense. But I decided, okay, I've got the nudge. I'm going to do this. And so over the course of getting back into my practice, deepening my practice, really understanding where my power lay in my meditation practice and in reading this book, it snapped me right the fuck out of it. And it was a reminder to me on several levels that this is exactly why I teach what I teach. Like I said, I don't do this shit lightly. I'm not just telling you, oh, go do this, like as though I haven't lived this. I know this works, and I know what happens when I don't do these things, and when most people don't do these things, what we're prone to. But so that's one piece of it. And then the other piece was in reading this book, and I highly recommend it actually. And I tore through it, and I finished it in, I was at the retreat and everything, but I finished it in about 10 days, and it's quite a lengthy book, but it's very much a page turner. But there were a couple of things that came out of that for me. The first of which I think a lot of people can resonate with, which was, we keep saying we're living in unprecedented times, but as it relates to discrimination and denigration of people that certain people will put in the category of other than, right? Which, and I mean, I want to be careful when I say this because not all white men are bad. There are amazing white men out there. My partner is one of them. And also, historically speaking, it has largely been Caucasian males that have perpetrated these things upon. It's not exclusive, right? Like, let's not overgeneralize, and also let's lay it at the doorstep where it belongs. So that's been the balance of power. But of this idea of discriminating against, treating as less than anyone who is of a different sex and certainly of a different skin color. And we won't even go into gender identification and in anything of that nature. Basically, it's just anything that is other than, right? And that's a whole topic in and of itself. And all I can say about that is you stop being a fucking asshole. I don't know how else to say it. How does someone else's life choice have any impact on you? It doesn't. Let them live their fucking life. They don't want anything to do with you. They just want to live their lives and be left alone. Okay? That's my PSA. That's all I'll say about that. Actually, that's probably not going to be all I'll ever say about that. But for the sake of this podcast, that's all I'm going to say, because there's one very specific thing that I want to narrow in on about this, and that is this. So in reading this book, and it was basically what it showed me was we're actually not living in unprecedented times. The suppression and oppression of other groups of people that are not white, Christian, males in particular has unfortunately been alive and well for a very long time. And in my perception, a lot of the heartbreak that many of us experienced in November is we believed that we had finally learned better. We believed that humanity was finally turning the page on oppression, on hatred, and on so many things that have kept different groups marginalized and tortured, and I just absolutely unconscionably suppressed and oppressed. And at the end of the day, as much as that was on, there was the part of me that was truly heartbroken that we really hadn't come farther in that regard, and that so much of that was coming to the surface more and more. And the sadness that we perhaps hadn't really come that far, that this is seeing such a resurgence. And at the same time, it was in a strange way, it brought an element, this is going to sound so weird, but bear with me. It brought an element of peace that sadly, these are not unprecedented times. These are very precedented times for the worst parts of humanity to be leading the show. And what was heartening to me about that is in reading this book and in seeing the example of one man's struggle through this oppression. And if you don't know who Nelson Mandela is, he was wrongfully imprisoned for over 30 years for essentially standing up against apartheid. And if you don't know anything about it, then I highly recommend you go educate yourself, because it's the quote, if you don't study history, you're doomed to relive it. Just get curious about history. Just go educate yourself. Educate yourself from trusted sources. Please don't ask AI. For the love of God, people. Go do your own research. But in reading this book and really hearing his words and hearing what he experienced, and certainly it's his account of what he experienced, but the quotes that stood out to me, and just the entire essence of his fortitude to continue to fight for freedom, to fight for freedom for South Africa, for the blacks in South Africa, and to continue to fight even when he was wrongfully imprisoned. And I read stories like that, and while it's terrible for it to have happened and there's no excuse for it to happen in the first place, what it does is it shows you the power of the human spirit to triumph no matter what. And that is really the point of what I'm calling out and what I'm pulling out in general, is that it's not that we don't go through dark times. I truly believe that at some point we, and when I say we, I mean we as a human race, are going to cross the threshold where we will finally, on the whole, right, the majority of the collective will say goodbye to the hatred and the oppression and all of just the absolute worst parts of humanity. We're not there yet, obviously, but what it takes is every individual who has the inclination and who has the desire to really start to deeply understand these principles and to really understand how to reclaim their own personal power in these ways, because then we literally form a community and a collective, and it's much, much harder to oppress and to bully and to intimidate a collective of people who are deeply connected to their own power and who will not be silenced or intimidated. Anyway, so I have a lot of passionate feelings about this, and I, to some extent, rein myself in a little bit, because yes, this is my podcast, but I could turn this into hours and hours of lessons in what humanity is, how we're fucking up, and how we actually are doing some things right, but need to keep doing more of those. However, I want to read a quote from the book, and this is really what resonated so deeply with me. Was Nelson Mandela said, after everything that he'd been through for decades in prison, he said, "I realized that they could take everything from me except my mind and my heart. They could not take those things. Those things I still had control over. And I decided not to give them away." And that is really ultimately what the message is. My message, so many people's message, is there will be forces outside of us that will want to control us, that will do horrible, unconscionable things to oppress people, to tear people down, to allow people to be treated truly. There just really are no words. And at the end of the day, your power lies in your mind and your heart. And that's where your strength is. And that's what I mean when I say you have the strength to choose. You have the strength to choose within you. Because the other thing is, and we've all been guilty of it. It's just a matter of, do you see it? Do you catch it? And you do something about it. But when you put it in the context of the amount of whiny entitlement that we see so many times, and the complete lack of perspective, and if you're going to crumble over somebody getting your order wrong in a restaurant, how the hell are you ever going to stand up to tyranny? How the hell are you ever going to stand up for what matters, right? And it's nothing other than a reflection of when you start to study truly great people in history and you see the obstacles that they've overcome and the challenges that they've faced, you really do understand the depth and the triumph and the capacity of the human spirit. And that's in you. It's in everyone. In some people, it's very, very dormant. In some people, it might never be awakened, but it does exist and it is there. And the other thing that really resonated, there was a lot that resonated, but there were two key quotes I wanted to call out in this episode, because it speaks to also how it doesn't excuse how anyone is treated. It doesn't excuse anything that was done. But what it speaks to is holding on to the anger and the resentment and the hatred hurts no one but you at the end of the day. And I'm not saying, oh, just forgive and let it go, because there are many things that happen that are much more complex than that. So I'm honoring and acknowledging that. And I'm also giving voice to, and the more you actively hold on to it, the more it's only harming you. It's not hurting the person that hurt you, it's hurting you. And so that's part of where the power comes in, is as you are ready to release bit after bit after bit of whatever the resentment and the hatred and the whatever terrible things you experienced in your life, the more that you can release those little threads in your own time, ultimately that's for you at the end of the day, and that's for your power. Because Nelson Mandela was asked, he said, he was asked, tell me the truth, when you were leaving prison after 27 years and walking down that road to freedom, didn't you hate them all over again? And Nelson Mandela's answer was, absolutely I did, because they'd imprisoned me for so long. I was abused. I didn't get to see my children grow up. I lost my marriage in the best years of my life. I was angry and I was afraid because I had not been free in so long. But as I got closer to the car that would take me away, I realized that when I went through that gate, if I still hated them, they would still have me. I wanted to be free, and so I let it go. And again, you let go of what you need to let go of all in your own time. Nobody else gets to tell you what that timing is, but it's an invitation to look at the things that the things you're holding on to that ultimately are hurting you more than it's hurting anyone else, and where your freedom and where your power lies. And circling back to why I was got the intuitive nudge to pick this book up in the first place was, and there are many more. I mean, it's an account of basically his entire time, and there's so much in there that is truly inspirational and also truly maddening, but it really does show a holistic picture of human nature. It's, in the same way that he experienced some guards and some people that were actually kind people, and he equally experienced guards that were very oppressive and cruel. And that is the tapestry of human nature. And so it's our individual choice to pick within ourselves how we want to respond and react. And it doesn't mean that we're not denying that terrible things are happening. None of those things are true, right? This is where a lot of people can get into the bypassing piece of it, of like, oh, well, just everything will be okay. Well, it doesn't honor the experience. First and foremost, we honor the experience. We honor the thing that happened or the things that are happening. We honor the experience for what it is, and we acknowledge the experience for what it is. Because anything other than that is essentially gaslighting ourselves or someone else in denying the experience happened. The experience happened or is happening. That's a fact. And then the question is, understanding that this shitty thing is true, what am I going to do about it now? Because that's the part, that is where your power comes in. With the, what am I going to do with this now? And am I going to let this to continue to control me? Am I going to let this continue to hurt me? Am I going to let this continue to rob me of my strength and my courage and my power? Or am I going to make the choice within myself to take that power back? And my intention was really for this to be a rather short podcast. And I think I probably have gone over what my original intention was, probably around the time when I got off track fussing at people because they are obsessed with other people's life choices. But anyway, the point is that especially in difficult times, remember where your power lies. And ultimately, that's something that no one else can dictate. You're the only one that can give that power away. And it's a practice, just like so many things, it's a practice of reminding yourself, where does my power lie? And that may be a question that you want to start asking yourself if you find yourself particularly challenged in this moment. Where does my power lie? because there's so much that's out of our control. Even if the world were sunshine, rose petals, and bunny farts, there's still plenty of things that are out of our control within your own world. Where does my power lie? My power lies in how I'm going to respond to this situation. My power lies with how I'm going to alchemize this experience within myself. My power lies with how I'm going to continue to stay connected to my courage, to my strength, and to the triumph of the human spirit. Light will always win in the end. Love will always win in the end. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to go through some shit in the meantime. But hold on to that and continue to ask yourself the question of where your power lies. Because the more and more you can explore that, and the more and more of a relationship that you can build with that, you will truly start to tap into your unlimited human potential. And that is how we navigate, one of the ways that we navigate uncertain times externally, but also one of the ways that we just strengthen our life in general, that we really align to me, that's really what it means to be the best version of yourself, right? And it's not about perfection. I just had this conversation with a friend the other day who is receiving the brunt of a lot of the things that are happening in the world right now. And they're an amazing soul. And we were having a conversation and she's like, I'm quitting today. I quit. I said, quit, girl. You fucking quit. Quit that fight. Quit it for today. Pick it back up again tomorrow. Because sometimes we need to do that too. And that is the idea that when there's a collective of us that are all working toward the same goal, it's just like a relay race. Tap out for the day. Tap out for a couple days and then tap back in, because we're all going to need to rest at some point. And there are going to be enough of us that the balance will be enough to create that tidal wave. So don't feel like you have to be on all the time. Don't feel like you have to be up all the time. Quit today. Pick up the fight again tomorrow. Make sure you pick it back up again and take amazing care of yourself in the process. So I would, if you feel inclined, I would highly recommend reading this autobiography. I would also recommend that you seek out the works or stories or accounts of great people in history. There are incredible scientists, creators, and just incredible humans out there who did incredible, amazing things through true oppression when they had absolutely no reason to thrive, to create, to be great. And in their way, they were greatness in the face of severe challenges and oppression and fear and a lot of other things. And so it really is about seeking out the stories and the evidence of people who have triumphed through dark times, through odds that you would, like I said, you're worried somebody got your order wrong at the restaurant. You ain't seen nothing. My goodness, people. I'm not harshing on anybody. It's just a human experience. It's all about perspective, right? And seek that out and let that fortify you on the days when you start to waver, on the days when everything around you starts to look a little bit too dark. And be the light and continue to be the light. And enough of us committed to that starts a wave. That starts a wave. And that does truly start a movement. And there's an energetic behind that. And that is my wish for all of us right now, because as much as we are seeing some of the worst sides of humanity, we equally are seeing some of the best sides of humanity. They just don't put that on the news. And there are a lot of people that are waking up in ways that maybe they've been a little silent and asleep. So I'm going to stop there, or this will turn into a 2-hour-long podcast. But I want to leave you with that invitation to ask yourself that question: in this moment, where does my power lie? And your power lies to choose within yourself and to continue to strengthen that muscle so that that choice becomes easier and easier, and so that your inner peace becomes more and more unshakable, Because I've said it before and I'll say it again. That is the definition of becoming unfuckwithable. Sparkle on, my loves. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Courage to Rise podcast. Visit my website, couragetorise.com, for more information on one-on-one coaching, group coaching programs, and other upcoming events. Remember, life's too short not to sparkle. Sparkle on.